Hello and welcome back. So I'm just trying a new setup here, a new location. I've got some new plants in here, and I moved one of my trees into this room. So it's just green. It's just green like crazy in here. It looks amazing, actually. All kinds of overgrowth, whatever you want to call that. Yeah. And lots of plants that are ready for to be transplanted and so on. Little peppers that are growing. Here, let me show you this one. This is kind of cool. I didn't know there was a pepper coming off this tree or plant yet. But look at the little baby pepper. These are small, so just to show you don't need a lot of space to be able to grow food. Yeah. All right. So hopefully you're having a good day. And if you're not, hopefully the lessons that you're learning from those tough times through your suffering can be shared with love, those around you, and energetically, as well as on all other levels of expression here as a human. Hopefully you find meaning in your suffering, if you are suffering right now. When I was in my early 20s, and before even reaching my 20s, late teens, I had this deep feeling about how everything happens for a reason. And I think that's what I was tapping into, not realizing that the reason is that which we give it. The meaning is that which we give it. So when you live in a way that you feel that everything that happens for a reason, it diminishes the darkness. It diminishes how heavy the darkness is, because we all go through times of light and times of dark. We all experience this cycle of, from feeling really good, then something happening and going down and being into the depths of despair and depression, and then finding the strength to come out of it. And it's as we reach somewhere around here, coming back up, that we realize that without this darkness down here, we would have never had the strength here. And once we get to the top, we realize that we're not the same anymore. And this whole cycle taught us something, and we came back here stronger than what we used to be. We were here before, but now that we've gone through all this destruction, this cycle of darkness, in the tarot, it's the Tower card. I think it's 50. I believe it's 15. Card number 15. I could be wrong. 13 or 15. 15, I think, is the devil. I could be wrong. It's not the point. We all go through this cycle of darkness, things going wrong in our lives, and really being at the bottom. And oftentimes we don't know how long we're going to be, down here as far as the light and dark cycle. So you feel really good, something happens in your life, and in my case it was a shoulder injury in the biggest event that I've experienced in my life that brought me down here. A shoulder injury on my left shoulder, which I couldn't even lift my my arm at all higher than this without experiencing sharp pain. And I was a trainer for, at that time in my life, 5 years, 6 years, and having experienced the ego gratification of being able to perform all these physical tasks, these physical feats, and have had brought my physical abilities up to a point where my heart, for example, was at the same level that an athlete would be. I felt very gratified. I felt very fulfilled in some sense. Although it wasn't spiritually fulfilling, it was very ego fulfilling and very physical, on the physical sense. I had something that nobody else had, or very few people had, and that was a large part of my identity. And when that was crashed and crumbled, when I had the shoulder injury, I started to lose my identity. I didn't know who I was anymore. And oftentimes when we get to this bottom part, that's really what it feels like, that you don't know, what your purpose in life is anymore, what you're here for, why is it all, what's it worth, what's the point? And this whole reclimbing is a rediscovery. It's a rebirth, if you will, coming back. Who are you now? And letting go of that old structure and moving into the new with the strength gained from all of that destruction and all of those trials and tribulations, if you will. So I call this the cycle of change. And we used to call this in the wellness industry, health and wellness, the stages of change. And so in the cycle of change, you're at a certain point and something catastrophic usually happens. Not necessarily always catastrophic, but something shatters your worldview. Something shatters your sense of identity and the sense of stability that you have in your life. So when you start to fall back down and be challenged in different ways, it can feel pretty painful. And coming back up the other side, when you realize that even though I've been through all of that pain, I'm still here and somehow I can handle it. You have this sense of, I can deal with this. I'm stronger than this. That's pretty powerful stuff. That's very uplifting, empowering, and your worldview changes. So in life, a lot of times a loss of identity, destruction of your current ego structure is extremely important when it comes to growth in all aspects of your life. You become more mature, you grow as a human being, and certain things that once meant a lot to you don't seem that important anymore. And you can really perceive a sense of growth from where you were to where you are now, and even where you're going. Oftentimes, though, where you see yourself going, you may have a interruption, if you will, or another shattering of that vision of where you're going, and that can sometimes, when you reach here, knock you back down a few steps. So this cycle of change isn't necessarily always one direction. Oftentimes something will happen and you may decide to hold on to that old ego structure, sense of identity, and deny the whole thing, and you may prolong your evolution. And oftentimes when you come here and you start to rebuild that strength, then you have to be careful around here of not creating an expectation of where you're going to be, because that expectation is itself, when you start to climb back up, if it is shattered, it can knock you a few steps back as well. And sometimes that's what we need, because we might not have developed the right strength that we think we had. Might not have, and that's the thing, it's not to attach onto any type of, don't feel as though you've got something now. Don't feel as though you're above this process now. Don't feel as though as you're climbing back up that you can't be knocked back down, because this is a continuous cycle of growth. Again, I call this the cycle of growth, which is not one directional. It's multi-dimensional, multi-directional. You'll be challenged constantly in your life. And oftentimes in the spiritual circles, we reach only for the light, and anything here at all is not necessarily good enough. It's not necessarily where you want to be, where you expect to be, where you envision the whole happiness and the bliss that comes from being spiritual is. You feel as though somehow you're not doing something right and you need to do something different. Instead, and what happens is we don't realize that this whole cycle is continual. Once you reach a certain point for a while and you feel happy for a little while, you're going to have more challenges. And the sense of ultimate enlightenment is when you recognize continually that up here, this happens. And when you're okay with this happening, then in a sense, nothing can shake you, because you don't stay up here. Instead, you stay here in the center of the wheel. And in the center of the whole wheel, you can see everything happening. You can witness your high points. You can witness your low points. You can witness the whole changing of each dynamic, each variant on that cycle. And from that center point is where enlightenment truly is. People have this assumption that when you're enlightened, you're always up here. And that's not the truth. In enlightenment, you're here. You experience all aspects, but recognizing that this is a cycle of change that happens, and you're not going to be able to always stay here and avoid this or anywhere along it. You can drop it. The whole thing, you recognize it so profoundly that you drop the clinging to this. You drop the clinging or the aversion to the low cycle. And when you find yourself, when you witness the climbing up and you're knocked back a few steps, it doesn't affect your ability to be the watcher. You're not so dragged into the storm, as sometimes it seems, that you recognize that this is not who you are. You are not these changing states of witnessing, these changing states of emotional drama, trauma. You recognize that you as a being, beyond what happens to you, you are. And in that sense of I am, it is a transcendent state of awareness. So these things, I can remember when I was going through the early stages of my awakening. I call it my awakening because that's the only word that I can really use to describe what it felt like when I was going through the early stages of my awakening. In the same way that when you first wake up in the morning, you feel groggy and you're rubbing your eyes and you're tired and you may want to go back to sleep. I can remember having this hangover, if you will, of this hangover from wanting, or from the previous states of awareness, in the same way that when you first wake up, you might want to just lie down again, sleep for a little while, because it feels really good. It's very comfortable, right? It's enjoyable. It really is, to a certain degree, to a certain point, to sleep. Sleep is comfortable. So, and I can remember feeling like I always wanted that happiness, because no one wants to have a nightmare in their dream. While you're sleeping and dreaming, nobody wants to experience a nightmare. And when I recognized that I was feeling as though I was having a nightmare, I would reach for that upper feeling again. Because at the very beginning of an awakening, when you have, in the experience that I had, when you have a sudden awakening, you're very much up here. For me, it lasted 2 weeks of the most intense joy, bliss, as far as the intensity of it. And then after about 2 weeks, it started to slowly make its way back down. And at that time, I was still identified with the doer on the wheel as instead of the being watching the doing. And I could remember when I would start to fall back on that wheel, and I could feel the cycle kind of going away, the intense happiness going away. I could feel a sense of anxiety, if you will, immediately come over me. I don't want this. Oh no, the happy is going away and the bad is coming back. So when you first have your awakening, it's very important to recognize and realize that is a process that happens. And the process of disidentifying with all the happenings along that wheel of change and re-identifying as the watcher that can witness all the happenings is a long process. You need to fall down many times and recognize that this just happens, and see that there's an aspect of you that within this cycle of change, there's an aspect of you that never changes. So that wheel, that cycle of change from up to down, the contrast from positive to negative to happy to sad and depressed, that contrast from one to the other is extremely important to help you recognize what aspect of you is unchanging. And that is the enlightened being that you already are. It's very difficult to recognize that enlightenment, that enlightened state of being, when you are identified with this cycle and as who you are. And when these cycles happen in very long periods of time, the contrast isn't so sharp. And what happens when you go through an awakening, at some point, you're going to notice that you get this a lot. We call it the kitchen sink in your awakening. You go through this cycle of up and down. It seems faster. 1 minute you're here, 1 minute you're here. It's to have you recognize that you're the witness, and to not take this cycle personally, to accept it and to let it go, that it's going to happen, and to learn how to be okay with the inside not going the way you want, the outside not going the way you want. And the funny thing is that in letting go of it going the way you want, your inside seems to tune into a way that is peaceful, that is actually the way you want. You might not realize what it is that you really want until you can recognize that letting go of wanting anything on this cycle of change to be any different than what it is what gives you peace. You might not recognize that what you want is not for this to change, but it's to be okay with the process itself. And in that being okay with wherever you are on that wheel, you transmute whatever it is you're experiencing, even the negative, into a more centered version of it. Again, you experience all sides, and giving meaning to your pain. So bringing the video complete here, bringing meaning to your pain down here will really help you to detach from it, because it can be very, very difficult sometimes when you're feeling intense sorrow and despair. So I'll leave you with that. Wherever you are around the world, whatever time it is that you're watching this video, thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I appreciate you. Peace.